Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the sixth seminar of the Italian Reproducibility Network. First, let me thank you, the Italian Psychological Association, for actively supporting this cycle of seminars. So really, thank you. And if you want to support our initiatives, you can join the Italian Reproducibility Network by becoming an active member of the association, or if you wish, you can subscribe to the mailing list and being updated with all of our initiatives. Another way to support our initiatives and staying updated with our activities is to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Before starting with today's seminar, we would like to remind you to give you some information about the Q&A session. If you can indicate that you want to ask a question by writing the word question with these square brackets in the chat, and we will give you the floor. Or if you wish, you can write your question in English or even in Italian if you prefer, and we will read it aloud and translate it as needed. And if you are a PhD student, please signal it, and we will give you priority to your question. Now, let me introduce our today's speaker, Iratxe Puebla. Welcome, very welcome, and thank you for being here, who is going to present a seminar on the revision process and preprints. Iratxe is the Director of Strategic Initiatives and Community at ASAP Bio. In her role, Iratxe works to drive initiatives that promote the productive use of preprints in the life sciences and greater transparency in peer review, including adoption of preprint review. Prior to ASAP Bio, Iratxe worked as an editor for different open access journals and served as deputy editor-in-chief at the journal PLOS ONE, where she was actively involved in editorial policy development and publication ethics. So, Iratxe, welcome again, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Michela, and thank you to the Italian Reproducibility Network for the opportunity to participate today. So as it has been noted, I'm going to be talking about preprints, but also the review process. And I think one of the things that I want to do today is also make a case that preprints can go beyond supporting open communication and actually help us advance a more constructive culture in peer review as well. As a brief outline of what I will cover, I'm going to start with a brief introduction to ASAP Bio. For those of you who may not be familiar with the organization, I'll talk a bit about preprints and some of the trends. I have to say, ASAP Bio has a focus on the life sciences, so bear in mind that there will be some focus from that side, but hopefully there will be also aspects that are broader across disciplines. I was going to talk about the review process, how it works today. What are some of the different models that journals operate, but also some of the issues with how, in my opinion, how it currently is implemented. And then I'll be talking quite a bit about preprint review and how preprints are a tool for culture change in peer review. So again, to get started, ASAP Bio is a non-profit. And we have a mission to make life science communication faster and more transparent. I think we are mostly known because we have a big focus on promoting a productive use of preprints in the life sciences, again, to accelerate that communication of the latest research findings. But we have also had some activities around transparency in peer review, some work since 2018 around transparency of peer review at journals. And then over the last 2 years, we had more of a focus around preprint review specifically. But I wanted to tell you a little bit about the motivation for ASAP Bio, what gave rise to this organization. And the thing is that, so I'm showing you here an analysis done by Ron Vale, who is the founder of ASAP Bio. He was doing this reflection as to how publishing worked for biology. He used to work he still works in biology, that's his field. And he was doing this reflection as to how publishing worked. And the fact that, in his opinion, it was taking a very long time to publish and how come. And what he did is, as he was looking into this, is he decided to have a look at publications from PhD students from University of California, San Francisco, where he was based at the time. And what he did is take a number of publications from the 1980s. So remember, at the time, there was no internet, no online journals, things were photocopied and sent over the post. And a comparison to papers 30 years later, so in the period 2012 to 2014. And he said, okay, I'm going to check how long it takes these PhD students to get their first publication as first author. And what he found was that when he was comparing those two sets of papers, actually the most recent cohort of papers had taken 1 year longer. So essentially it was taking the PhD students 1 year longer to publish their first author paper, even though, again, by the 2010s, we had the internet, all these wonderful online workflows from the journals, etc. So he decided to do another analysis to try to understand what may be behind this trend that is somewhat counterintuitive, given the technology that was available in the 2010s. And what he did is he completed a similar analysis looking at publications specifically in 3 journals. So this time looking at the content of the papers, and he looked at the number of panels of essentially results that were contained in those publications. He looked at 3 journals, Cell, Nature, and the Journal of Cell Biology. And again, same concept of looking at papers with a 30-year interval. And as you can see from his analysis, essentially the set of publications from 2014 had within the main paper many more results, much more data, more figure and table panels compared to the publications from 1984. But in addition, obviously, by the 2010s, we had the online journals, and you could add all of these supplemental files. So you had much more data being reported per paper in the same journal 30 years later. And essentially what he came to realize from this is that probably there may be different factors, but probably one of the factors that was feeding into this delay in publication, even though there was new technology available, was the fact that the threshold to create a publishable unit at the journal had increased. Essentially, if you wanted to meet the favor of the editors at these 3 journals, you had to spend much more time developing more results, creating more figures, a much more complex paper. And this led to Ron Bale's reflection in terms of saying, okay, this may be how journals operate, but actually the scientific community could benefit from having other ways of communicating the results faster without introducing these delays. And that's how he came to recommend preprints as a way of communication, because at the end of the day, with preprints, what you're doing is you're putting the control on the time of publication back in the hands of researchers and beyond the journal editors. So to give you a little bit of an overview, and I realize many of you may be familiar with this, but the traditional journal-based publication process looks more or less like this. I mean, there are different models and frameworks, but roughly you prepare your manuscript, submit to a journal, an editor will look at it, decide whether they want to peer review it and consider it further or not. Sometimes they just reject it at that point, saying it's not for us. You may need to submit somewhere else. Eventually, the journal, if they decide to consider your paper, they will send it for peer review. I'm going to be speaking more about what peer review is, but broadly, they will seek expert input on your paper. And then, assuming that the critiques are not too bad, and it means a rejection, the editor will ask you to make revisions, respond to the comments, etc. So this may take several cycles and some months. Eventually, assuming that everything goes smoothly, you submit your revised paper again, and the editor accepts it, and eventually the journal will publish this. The way things work today is that from the time at which you have finished drafting your paper and you say, I have my manuscript, and when the journal makes it available to the community, you have a time lapse of months and sometimes even years. I mean, this list 1 year. I used to work as an editor. I've seen things taking even more than 1 year. So by comparison, if we look at introducing preprints into this research communication process, what the same researcher can do is take the manuscript they have drafted, and once they are ready, when they decide it's ready to share with the community, you have completed the full details, reporting, etc. And you say, I have now rigorous results that I can share with my community. You can take that same manuscript and submit it to a preprint server. And what the preprint server will do is often, depends on the model, but some of them have a internal screening just to check that it fits their scope and that there is nothing that they don't like in terms of any problematic issues with the paper. But generally, that's done very quickly. And what they do is they take that copy of the manuscript that the researcher has submitted and post it publicly available in essentially in a few days. So as you can see, we've gone from months to a year to just shortening that time elapsed for the communication to the community in a matter of days. And at ISABio, we believe that this is important and useful to the community because what you're doing is giving them that work already, months in advance compared to the journal publication. A few things to mention about preprints are important to remember that they are permanent citable records. So that most of the preprint servers will assign a persistent identifier to your preprint, so to your paper, usually in the form of a digital object identifier or a DOI, so you can cite it. It's traceable. The one thing to remember about preprints is that the preprint server does not complete peer review. This is what essentially accelerates the communication. They will take the copy of the manuscript and they will just make a determination, yes, it fits for us, it's fine, or not. Again, the majority of the papers that are submitted to servers are posted, but it's not peer reviewed. This is essentially the copy as you will provide it to them from the researcher side. And something else to highlight about preprints is the fact that most preprint servers allow you to version your paper. Essentially, it's very easy. You post your preprint and then you say, actually, I've done another, a few more experiments. I want to add another figure or several more figures, or I spotted something that, perhaps I got wrong. It can happen. You can update your manuscript and submit your updated version to the server. And essentially that will be posted next to the previous original copy. So again, you can trace the history of that paper, which means that compared to, for example, the journal process as well of doing a correction that can take also weeks and months while the editors look into this, etc. This can happen in a matter of days. So here's my new version, it's again citable, etc. So the speed of dissemination of that paper is, of course, a big benefit of preprints, but there are others that I also wanted to mention. One thing to highlight is the fact that preprint servers operate models where you can publish a preprint for free. So there is no article processing charges like in some of the open access models. And there is also no subscription fee or paywall. So essentially anyone can post for free. Anyone with an internet connection will be able to access your paper. I also wanted to highlight the fact that preprints are journal compatible. For a number of years when preprints started to pick up in the life sciences, there was some concern among researchers that not every journal would be happy to take a paper that was already on a preprint server. Luckily, things have changed substantially over the last years. And now a large majority, is not a 100%, but a large majority of journals, at least in the life sciences and certainly in physics, where they've been using preprints for years, there is no issue in terms of having a preprint and then submitting to a journal. And in fact, there can be the benefit of having a preprint can also be that if you have any concerns about saying, no, I know that there are other groups working on something similar, you can post your preprint when you are ready. And there will be a data stamp on that preprint. So when you submit to a journal, you can go and say, I posted this 2 months ago. This is when I made this claim. This is my work and my results. And in fact, there are a number of journals now that have policies that recognize that date. Essentially, they're happy to recognize the date of the preprint as when you first made that claim. And they consider that the first date, not the submission date to the journal. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that having a preprint can be a great way of increasing the visibility and reach of your paper. Obviously, as I mentioned, it's freely available. So, no issues with anybody accessing your paper. You're free to share it and people can access. And interestingly, there's been several studies that have looked at the attention and citations for peer-reviewed articles, comparing what happens when they have a preprint previous to the journal article and not. And so far, every analysis shows that when you have a prior preprint, the time that the article appears at the journal, it tends to get more attention and citations, which kind of makes sense because you're giving the paper 2 waves of visibility, and also the preprint already gave other people a heads up saying, I've done this, you can build on it and cite it as soon as you're ready. There is been a lot of activity around preprints in the life sciences over the last few years. I'm sorry, you must have heard of it. I wanted to mention the fact that particularly in the life sciences, it's been quite a fast-paced and busy ecosystem, I would say since 2016, 2017. Importantly, bioRxiv, which is a preprint server for biology, started in 2013, but there has been many others that have been created since. Some are multidisciplinary and cover any discipline, and some others are specific to either life sciences, or some also, for example, have a regional focus, and they want to mostly highlight research from specific regions in the world, so Africa, South America, etc. So there is currently over 50 preprint servers. And we have seen a lot of attention to preprints, as I mentioned, over the last few years. There's been year-on-year growth since 2013 when bioRxiv started, but things really accelerated from 2020 because, well, as you know, there was a global pandemic, and it was particularly important to share as much data as possible that could inform the response from governments, from the community, you know, treatments, vaccine development, etc. So there was a strong adoption of preprints from 2020 onwards because they were a great mechanism to share those even preliminary data related to COVID-19. So a lot of attention to this. One thing I wanted to nuance here is that it doesn't mean that, at least in the life sciences, preprints is happening for every paper. That's not the case. So to give you a scale of the adoption, using data from Europe PMC, which is an indexer that covers mostly biomedical sciences, if you compare the number of preprints that they included last year to the number of journal publications that they included also for 2022, the number of preprints comes to around 10%. So that's kind of the scale of adoption that we see. But importantly, as you can see, I mean, I think that the important thing to remember here is this: 5 years ago, this number was probably 1 or 2%. So the jump has been substantial. And if there are a number of things that have supported this growth in preprints, I wanted to highlight mostly 3 items. One is at the moment that a number of funders indicated that preprints could be included in grant application and reports. This was hugely influential. A number of funders now include preprints in their policies. I would highlight particularly influential, in my opinion, the NIH from the US. And also the European Research Council, that both accept preprints now. Again, something else that has really helped with understanding and adoption is also the fact that we have seen this growth in the number of platforms available. And as I mentioned, a number of platforms that also have a regional focus. So for example, AfricArchive has a focus on research in Africa or by African researchers, or Cielo Preprints, which is this network of information that has a focus on Latin America. And the third item that has also been important in this space is the fact that a number of indexers and literature search tools now also include preprints, which means that they are also much more visible to anybody who's doing, you know, search in the literature. I'm doing research in this area. I need to keep abreast of the latest research that is coming out. Is so much easier these days to get essentially the latest preprints out there, and it's also a way for the authors who post preprints to get more credit. So preprints are currently now included in ORCIDs as outputs. As I mentioned, Europe PMC, Google Scholar, and the NIH started a pilot that was specific only for COVID-19 preprints, but now has expanded that for every preprint funded by the NIH. Something that I wanted to mention, because it tends to come up in conversations, maybe less so now, but conversations I was having with some people years ago, was this concern of saying, okay, so I post my preprint on the preprint server, it's not peer reviewed, this may become the wild west, everybody posts anything. Can I trust preprints? Fine, okay, fingers crossed, apologies again. Okay, yes, so what I was explaining here was the fact that there's been a number of studies that compare preprints to their journal publication, and in fact, consistently what they find is that the conclusions stand. So preprints are not being used by researchers to say, you know, I'll put anything out there and then, you know, I'll fix it. Once I submit to the journal, it shows that essentially it is a mechanism for researchers who are doing solid work to just make that available to the community earlier and engage in that dialogue as well with the community. Very briefly, we have, if you want to dive into preprints in greater detail, we have a lot of resources in the ASAP Bio Resource Center. And I'm particularly proud to say that we just finished the translation of our preprint infographics to Italian. So I thought it was the perfect opportunity to share. They are available on the website. I have linked there, as well as other resources, so you can have a look. Right, but as I mentioned, I'm also going to be talking a little bit about peer review. I'm sure that many of you know what peer review is, but basically peer review is an evaluation of a manuscript that is completed by an expert in the field. So traditionally in the journal system, there is an editor who selects and invites experts in the field discovering the manuscript. So those are the peers. And those experts are asked to provide an evaluation, so a report, a review on that paper, and journals usually try to obtain 2 or 3 reviews. It varies, but this is essentially the most common. And the idea is that, again, in an idealized scenario, you want reviewers who are knowledgeable in that field of work, but also who can provide an objective review. So hopefully that they don't have competing interest or something else that may bias their assessment. But before I dive into a bit more into peer review, one thing I wanted to share with you is a little bit of context historically, because I think that sometimes we forget that peer review within the journal system is a relatively new phenomenon. Essentially, it's not something like, oh, we created journals and everybody does peer review. That's not how journals were created. The first scientific journals as such started in the 1600s, and then the first flavor of sorts of peer review happened with the medical essays and observations in 1731. But again, it wasn't necessarily the norm, and there were not so many journals at the time. And then the first time that kind of peer review operated like we know it today was part of the Royal Society, where they started commissioning public reports on manuscripts. And the interesting thing is that their motivation for doing this was that they wanted reports that could help say, democratize the scientific findings a bit more, essentially give more visibility to those findings, make them more accessible to a broader audience. So they say, okay, let's have some reports that we will post publicly with the papers. We are going to publish the papers anyway, essentially. This was not to inform whether to publish or not. We're going to publish the research in this paper, and then we'll attach these other reports for further context. So this was in 1831. Very quickly, the debate started as to whether this report should be to just provide more context or to actually do some quality control and check for problems. And then very quickly what they did is say, okay, this is a bit complex. Let's have these reports private and in an anonymous fashion, which is more or less what we know as the majority today. And then a number of years passed, and it was only after, so in the 1970s, that journals actually started adopting peer review. This was after the Second World War. We had this explosion in scientific journals, particularly for international audiences. And it was around the 1970s with the majority of the journals then implemented peer review as a mechanism as part of the editorial process. We've seen some innovation around this, different flavor. For example, PLOS ONE was launched with an idea of decoupling this assessment, saying, why don't you just look at the rigor and let the evaluation of impact for post-publication? But essentially, I think this is interesting because what we see is that compared to the original first version of it, what this became was essentially something that happens behind closed doors. And also we need peer review to decide whether we publish articles or not, which was not how it was originally envisioned. So what we see today is that we have seen, again, as I mentioned, innovation and different experiments and journals, and there are different types of peer review. I thought I would share this peer review terminology that was developed by STM, is a publisher organization, and they got a group of editors together to try to say, can we come up with some taxonomy or categorization of all the different forms of peer review we are seeing at the journals. And as you can see here, what they did is essentially map it out to 4 elements. The first one relates to identity transparency, essentially who can know who the other is as part of the review process. The most common version of this, I would say, is the single anonymized review, at least in the life sciences. Essentially, the reviewers will know who the authors are, but the authors don't know who the reviewers are, unless the reviewer by their own motivation identifies themselves. But there are different flavors. Again, you can also do double anonymized, where the reviewers will not know the identity of the authors, or you can even have the triple anonymized, where even the editor doesn't know who the authors are, because at the end of the day, it is the editor who makes the decision. So you see, like, if you blind the reviewer, but the editor knows, you are not reducing all of the potential biases. There is also flavors of peer review regarding the interaction that reviewers may have either with the edit. So in many journals, the reviewer only interacts with the editor. So the editor invites them and then they respond to the editor. That's kind of it. There are some other journals that have introduced different modalities where reviewers talk to each other and do a consolidated summary, so to speak. And in some others, even they interact with the authors. Then there is the element of the review information, whether this is published or not. Again, a majority of journals operate confidential reviews. So essentially, they handle the reviews internally and then publish the article, and nobody else can see what happened behind the scenes. Some journals are have now implemented what they call transparent peer review, where they will publish the articles and they attach the review reports to the articles, not necessarily the names of the reviewers, but the content of the reports. And then again, there are different other flavors. And the post-publication commenting, this relates to the additional engagement that you can have with papers after publication. So you will do from the journal perspective, do the peer review and then decide whether to publish or not. And once the article is published at the journal, you can also provide other ways of engagement with that. So for example, by providing commenting features that anybody can participate in, or by inviting responses, letters to the editor, etc. So this is more or less how the journals run peer review. I'm going to now be discussing a few issues, what in my opinion are issues with the current culture, or what this has become in the context of the journal processes. The first is that, again, peer review is used currently as a mechanism to make these decisions on publication. So then the editor goes to the reviewer and tells the reviewer, advise me, should I publish this? And then the reviewer is there, oh, hang on, I need to make a determination as to whether this paper, not whether this paper is solid as it is rather whether this paper looks suitable for you according to what you hope to have at the end of the process. And this means that often we have this situation with reviewers asking extra work, because, you know, this is very well done, but I want you to do these 2 or 3 other things because otherwise it doesn't meet this threshold, etc. It also means that in that context, we can have the power dynamics coming into play, because you can say, okay, I'm submitting, and then, you know, have to kind of please the reviewer, or, you know, comply with the request that I get this positive response at the end of it, rather than being a discussion between peers, because at the end of the day, the peer reviewers are experts, but the authors are experts in their work. So ideally, you would like to have a more constructive dialogue. The other thing, again, as I mentioned, the majority of the journals operate with closed models. I think this is a shame, because for a number of reasons. Essentially, if you were to publish the review reports with the articles, is a training opportunity. For example, you know, if I'm learning how to do peer review, I could read different reports, see what my peers thought about this paper. And so we are missing an opportunity there. Is also missing an opportunity to provide context on those papers for those who are not specialized readers. if you are not specifically in that field, it can be very useful to say, okay, here's a page or 2 pages from somebody who understands it and is kind of distilling it for me. And the other thing that we are missing out on in this process is that because the reviews are closed, if your paper is rejected, nobody else sees this report, you submit to another journal, you start de novo, so more and more reviews commenting on the same work and adding to that system. The other thing is, obviously, I don't think in the current system where science is increasingly multidisciplinary, and as we saw the papers increasingly complex, I don't know if it's any longer reasonable to expect that 2 or 3 people who are doing reviews on top of all their other work, researcher is busy, that we can expect them to spend hours and hours in combing through every paper and catching all of the issues. And we know that's not the case. Essentially, peer review is run by humans and it's not perfect. And I don't know that it's a reasonable expectation to have from that process. And then finally, this is something that is very close to my heart. I'm a great supporter of meta research, and I think, again, we are missing an opportunity by not publishing those reports that would allow us to do more research into how does peer review operate? What are perhaps even the demographics, who participates, what makes a good peer review report? Essentially, I don't think there is a very consensual view in the community around this. We have now some evidence from the analysis I showed you earlier on the comparison between preprints and journal articles about the fact that even though you can peer review the paper, but the claims were already there, so the majority is what the author gave you in the paper. But I think we could build more evidence around that and say what are the aspects perhaps that peer review is adding value on for the paper versus the one that really can we have an expectation that it will pick on those. So what I'm going to be now moving on to is to say we believe at ASAP that there are many benefits in incorporating peer review and preprints together and actually using preprints to advance a better culture of peer review. So as a little bit of context around preprint review, as I mentioned earlier, preprints are posted by the server without peer review. Essentially, the server will not peer review the paper. But this doesn't mean that there cannot be peer review on those preprints because they are public records. So, I can read the paper, access it for free, and decide that I'm going to write a review and post it publicly. There are many ways in which all of us can interact with preprints. Again, another option, again, we can discuss whether this counts as a review or not. But there are many ways to interact. There is a strong community on Twitter who shares preprints and shares their opinions, whether they may be praised, they may be critiques of papers. And there are many other platforms that have now started kind of layered on top of the fact that we now have more preprints to do different flavors of review, comments, curation of those preprints. And you see some of those there. So I think there are many benefits of preprint review. Again, as it's a great opportunity to get feedback for the authors so they can improve their paper, perhaps catch errors, improve the presentation, etc. As I mentioned, these public reviews can be a great way of providing context for readers and also allowing those reviews to be reused later. So if I post a preprint and I get a very detailed, useful review on it and it's public, when I submit to the journal, I may say, look, here is a useful review. I have responded to this. You don't need to start the process de novo, or you can complement this, but this can accelerate the process. And an important element of preprint review is the fact that anybody can participate. In a journal process, you rely on the editor deciding who is a suitable reviewer. And in my experience, they often rely on the network that they have, the people that they know, and essentially, I'm not saying this is done in purpose, but you can introduce these biases into the system as to who participates. We know, for example, early career researchers don't get the same opportunities to participate, etc. In preprint review, we are on the same footing. If I decide to do a review, it doesn't matter. I don't need to be invited, provided I'm polite and useful, I can participate. So in a way, I think that what we have here is that preprint review actually comes back to this original goals of review, of the peer review. You're evaluating the science for the science, saying, is this solid, how it can be improved, but not necessarily to say, oh, you need to do A and B and C to meet the bar for journal J. I thought it may be useful as well to give you a brief overview of some of the platforms where that are out there where you can contribute preprint reviews. And I've separated this into sections. I thought I would start mentioning a few options to contribute reviews on preprints where, again, anybody can participate. The first option is that many preprint servers provide commenting features. So you can actually go to the preprint server, read the paper, and post a comment there directly. It will be displayed next to the paper, as you see in this example. And if you say, okay, I want to post publicly, but don't identify myself because I'm not comfortable doing that, you can just create an account with a pseudonym, and they accept that. Is no problem. Another platform that is specifically designed to host preprint reviews and where anybody can also participate is Pre-Review. It's an online platform where you can go and find the paper that you would like to comment on and post different formats of reviews. They give you different options, including some useful templates, etc. And Pre-Review also allows you to either sign your reviews, so essentially display your name, or to post anonymously. And interestingly, Pre-Review, what they do is once you post the full review, they will assign a DOI. So actually, even your review is now a citable item. Those are a couple of examples of how anyone can participate. There are other platforms and services and initiatives that have been created where the preprint review is actually much more integrated into the journal process, and I wanted to mention a few of those to you. And because these reviews are more integrated into the journal process, it also means that the process of the preprint review looks much more similar to what we know from the journal side. There is an editor selecting reviews, etc. So the first platform is Review Commons. Here again, there is an editor who invites reviewers and collects the reviews. And then what Review Commons does is takes that to the authors. And they do a couple of things. One is that they invite the authors to also write a response to those reviews. And then all of that will be posted publicly with the preprint. So you have the full package of the preprint publicly available, the reviews publicly available, and the engagement from the author saying, no, we agree with this, or we are going to, or disagree because, our interpretation is the following. The other important element of Review Commons is that they have partnered with a group of 17 journals who have accepted to reuse the reviews that they provide. So if you're the author of this preprint that has been reviewed through Review Commons, you can take your paper and the reviews that Review Commons have sent you and the response, and go to the journal and say, okay, here's the package. Can you make a decision as to what you would like to publish my paper or not? And this means that on the journal side, once you submit, you generally get a much faster response because they don't have to restart the review process de novo for that paper. Another platform that operates in a similar fashion is PR Community In. In PR Community In, they have different sections based on disciplinary focus. So they have 15 groups. And what they do here is that they have somebody whom they call the PR Community In recommender, who acts similarly to a journal editor, and again, selects reviewers, invites reviewers, collects the reviews, etc. And once the reviews are received, PR Community In will publish the reviews and a recommendation from this recommender. So essentially something like similar to a decision saying, this looks a solid paper or there are some issues. And most recently, what PR Community In has done is that they have created their own journal, the PR Community Journal, and they also allow the authors of these preprints to take the reviews that they have provided and just have a journal copy as well through their own journal without restarting the process again. The last example I wanted to mention is the journal eLife, which is slightly different because eLife started as a more traditional journal. But eLife has taken a position very much pro preprints for a while now. Since 2021, they only reviewed papers that were already available as a preprint. And actually, this year, they have implemented an updated model for their process where what they do is they do the peer review as they did before. They have an editor who coordinates the peer review process. But what they want is to focus on saying, we will produce these peer reviews. We don't want to make editorial decisions. So essentially, eLife is no longer making decisions of acceptance or rejection. What they do is say, I have reviewed your paper, we have the evaluations, and then they publish that as its own output, a reviewed preprint. So you have the preprint, the reviewers' comments, and an e-life assessment that kind of condenses all that information. So you have all of this transparency of the history of the paper since it was a preprint, and all of the comments transparently next to it. Something else I wanted to highlight is the fact that there are many ways to participate in preprint review. It means that journal reviewers can also participate in preprint review, because what they could do if you are reviewing a journal submission and the paper has a preprint, you could take your review and actually post it with the paper and make it transparently available, independent of what's the model of the journal. Reviewers can make now their own choices. So if you're interested, check our Publish Your Reviews initiative. There is a number of resources for reviewers there. Obviously, preprint review is relatively new. Again, in the life sciences, we didn't have so many preprints until relatively recently. So it's been growing as preprints have grown. I think it's interesting to see how this has, again, continued to grow in adoption, and I think we'll see more and more activity. The graph here is the number of preprints that have public reviews alongside them. Is based on CITES, an aggregator of preprint reviews, and as you can see, there's been a substantial growth over the last 5 years or so. There's also, interestingly, signals from funders saying that they will count reviewed preprints. So essentially, the funders that I list here, so the MBOR regarding their postdoctoral fellowships, and also the funders as part of Plan S, and a number of funders that came in support of the new e-life model. What they have said is, for any criteria where we list that you need to give us reviewed papers, we will count reviewed preprints as equivalent to journal peer-reviewed publications. Essentially, they're saying, provided there is a system of peer review that we can trust, it doesn't matter if it's in the journal or from outside the journal, including preprints. It is important, I think, also to think at these earlier stages of preprint review about, again, what's the culture and the behaviors that we would like to see. We don't want to go down the pitfalls of some of the issues that we have seen in journal review. So in this context, ASAPbio convened a working group a couple of years ago, and we developed the FAST principles, which are here to guide how to create, respond, or interpret preprint feedback, again, publicly. FAST stands for the 4 broad themes for these principles: focus, appropriate, specific, and transparent. And essentially, they are trying to guide anybody who participates in preprint review to provide feedback that is useful for the authors, useful for the paper, constructive and welcoming, inclusive, etc. The other thing I wanted to highlight in the context of preprint review is that this also opens up new options for what this feedback can lead to. Essentially, it doesn't need to be a decision for a journal. Now it's really value for the authors and in a number of different ways. So one example is that actually by getting comments on the preprints early, it can help the authors improve their paper and actually address any problems before journal publication. This is an example from a preprint posted in Preprints with the Lancet. It was related to COVID-19. They posted a paper about a clinical trial. Very quickly, there were comments from the community saying there are some issues with the design, the reporting, etc. This led the Lancet to do a fast-track review based on those comments and those commenters. And actually, in this occasion, they decided to remove that paper. But what happened is that the comments did not go unnoticed for the authors. They took on board the comments, revised the paper. And when this was eventually published at the journal, several months later, they had actually addressed those comments about the reporting and the clarity in the design that were raised for the preprint. Another opportunity for preprint review is that actually it doesn't need to be about correcting errors. It can be to help you decide where to go next for your research project. We have an example here from Ian Chismond, Alex Navarro, who were working on a side project and said, oh, we had some unexpected results. We don't know what to do with this, but it may be helpful for the community. So they wrote up a very brief preprint and posted it, and specifically said, we want comments on our paper. What should we do next? They got a number of comments from the community, and then several months later did more experiments based on that, posted another version with additional figures, and did a couple of rounds of this. iteration, and eventually the paper was published in a journal 2 years after it initially came up as a preprint. And then, as I mentioned, this is also an opportunity to do further meta-research on on peer review, because we have now more of these comments on different flavors. Again, some of them may be full reviews, some may not, but it allows us to perhaps do a little bit more of an analysis of how scientists interact with each other and the type of comments that they provide and how the authors incorporate them or not as part of that process. Right, so very briefly, just to wrap up now, I also wanted to highlight the fact that we have recently posted a preprint, I think it was posted just yesterday, about advancing the culture of peer review through preprints. This was the summary from an in-person meeting that we hosted last December with different stakeholders, where we discussed the importance of preprint review and, importantly, of recognizing that as part of institutional funder processes, again, within the interactions with researchers, etc. So we have included some suggestions for everybody who may want to support preprint review. I listed a few of them here for you, specifically for researchers. Don't be shy about requesting reviews on your next preprint. You can see the red banner we posted on our preprint. We welcome comments. It's always easier to get comments if you say welcome comments. You can obviously, of course, write and post preprint reviews, and I would suggest you do this in a platform like Pre-Review, others who assign DOI, participate in peer review through these more organized structured platforms that are still focused on preprint reviews, such as Review Commons, eLife, etc. Another great and potentially fun way of doing this is that if you're already participating in Journal Club, why don't you make it a preprint club? Make a point of just reviewing preprints and actually just have somebody summarize the discussion. It doesn't need to be very long, just 3 paragraphs, and post that publicly. It will be useful for the authors and others. And another suggestion that one of the researchers involved with ISABIO is doing, which I think is quite nice, is that in his lab, they consistently list the preprint reviews that they do. They post all the reviews on preprints, and they have that in their live website very clearly saying, we care about this. And for anybody who may join our team, this is part of our culture and our practice. And with that, thank you so much for listening. I listed some of the resources there, and I'm happy to address any questions.
Thank you very much, Iratxe. And well, I thought it was a really cool talk, and I will just wait a few seconds to see if anyone has questions. I will post our really brief instructions on the Q&A, but just to say it out loud, basically, if you have a question, just either raise your hand, open your microphone and ask your question, or if you rather have someone else, one of us, read it out for you, just write the question in the chat. Otherwise, I have a small one, but which is only partly a question. Part of it was, I really like the talk, and I really like some of the ideas in the very last slides that you suggested, such as the preprint reading club. Basically, that is really interesting. And another one, though, is part of my underlying anxiety that I will soon have to read not only a paper, but a paper with a bunch of reviews with it, and it will become a really daunting task to do any sort of literature review or anything. And so on the one hand, I love the idea that I can share so much and that I can go and see what other people did. On the other hand, I start to feel the need to have some sort of summary somewhere, or even just, for example, I don't know if the sorry, I forget the name, but what the eLife assessment should be something, that kind of thing. So here is the article, here are the reviews, and here is an overall summary of what you should keep in mind. Is there any idea or systematic implementation also of this sort of
That's a great question. Yeah, sure. I think it's a great point, this element of, we are all busy, so, there is only so much information I can sift through. eLife, as part of their assessment, has implemented a taxonomy, categorization of sorts that covers different things. So, the interest in the field, if you care about that, the rigor, I can't remember, they must have something about openness, etc. And I'm a great fan. I mean, it's relatively new. It was implemented at the end of January, so we'll have to see. But I know they are planning to do some, tracking or research on that. I'm a great fan because I think this is a great way of surfacing that information for readers, and hopefully they'll find a way of making it programmatically searchable. So you could use it for filtering. Say, I only want to, maybe I only want to read the papers that are sound. I don't care if somebody else is interested. I want just in this field, the things that eLife says is rigorous. So I think that's a great suggestion. I'm not aware of some form of systematic way, but I think it's something that we will see develop in this space as we have more and more reviews. You can do more filtering and association. I mean, the thing I tend to think about in terms of, I have more information to read through, is that for certain, depending on how you search, it can be useful to say, I'm interested in preprints that have reviews. They may not be positive, but maybe I want to see something where somebody else have already looked through it. So I mean, it can be a filtering tool in itself, saying, I'm only going to read these ones. I'm not suggesting that that's what should be done. I'm just saying that you could potentially use it. So I see potential avenues there to increase the filtering options and, make it more customizable for readers while you're searching for papers, to try to manage that kind of risk of information overload.
Okay. Yeah, it's already, you're right, it's already, and itself, it offers some way of discriminating and choose what I want to go and delve deeper into. Okay. Oh, I saw you also, thank you, posted the link to the slides, so in the chat. And I am sorry because I thought I posted the Q&A directions to everyone, but I did not. But okay.
Yeah, if I may ask something, actually is like a more thinking aloud, because I think that preprints is in psychology, which is my field of research, preprints are not that common actually. So I was wondering, if you do a preprint and then you can versioning, it means that you can change based on new evidence or based on the comments that people post about on your preprints. But when the process ends, because it will end at some point, I believe. I mean,
that's a fair question. I think right now the system is that often you finish. I mean, this is why they call the article version of record. Like, here's the version. That's the end of that, signals the end of the process. That's true. So I mean, you have the option of saying, I'm not going to work on this any further. We all move fields, so interest, or you don't have any more funds to continue. That's fair enough. I don't have an issue with that, and I think often, again, in the current system, authors use the journal version for that. I would just say in the future, it doesn't need to be the case. I mean, I'm not an active researcher, but I do quite a bit of writing. I preprint everything I do, as you may expect, and often I don't publish it in a journal. I'm just like, here's this. I'm not going to take it any further. It may be useful to somebody, maybe in 20 years, who knows? So I think that the interesting thing from my perspective is that in the preprint space, you can choose when that is. You don't have to chase this carrot of the journal when the editor tells you you have finished it. You see, in the preprint, it's like, I know researchers who have decided not to submit to journals anymore. They will have the preprint reviewed and say, here it is. It doesn't mean that I don't care about revising this or there's in errors. This is that I don't want to go down the path of the journal. So they're like, here's my latest version. I've revised it and you have it. So I think it's more about this making choices rather than saying, yeah, you can have the final version. You can just say, okay, I finished this project, but you choose one.
Okay, thank you.
Now that you mention it, I briefly thought that having like a living document that you keep working on and updating on the one hand would be interesting and an interesting avenue to walk on, but a bit more difficult to go back and reference. But you know, these are my past 2 years of research, and I keep updating the file as I go along.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, well, I use GDocs in this way, but you know, not necessarily for public consumption. But I was gonna say the example I gave from Ian Chisman and his student, I'm fairly sure that the preprint went through at least 3 versions. And then they say, okay, now we have something that we want to say, that's the story, and we sent it to a journal. But I think the advantage there, as I mentioned, is that the first preprint was available 2 years prior. So if you were working in that field, without the preprint, you would have had to wait 2 years to hear this. And with the preprint, it was like, oh, I can already use your peptide for my purpose. You know, we are accelerating science that way.
I think we can wait a couple more minutes for other interventions or comments. And
also, I was wondering, sorry, maybe perhaps a silly question, but once you, publish your research that I posted the preprints on it, these versions should align, should be equal, or they should be unified into a single object, because otherwise there will be 2 versions of the same research, and that will be redundant in a way. So I was wondering how to handle this practical thing about preprints.
So you mean essentially, say I update my preprint, there are 2 versions, how to best handle it, for example, for citation purposes. So the way
may add, I'm sorry, if I may add also a legal stuff. So if the paper is accepted, what kind of license should be follow, and what do you have to do with a preprint version?
Right. So briefly on the versioning, so essentially my suggestion is if you're citing preprints, and there is more than one version, cite the version with the date so that people know, you know, you're going to version 2, date, blah, blah, blah. And the way that the servers tend to handle this is there are a couple of ways, but the most common are either they assign a different DOI per version, so then you can just put the relevant DOI, or some servers assign a single DOI for the old records, but then there is a kind of suffix, kind of, you know, like if you want accession numbers or, you know, V2 or something. So you can still use that URL as a differentiator. But again, if you are using that in citation, my recommendation is be a specific version 2, March 2023 or whatever, and like that everybody can trace it back because they are public records. For the license, essentially, there shouldn't be, I mean, my advice is go and check if you want to preprint and want to submit to a journal. My advice across the board, not only for licenses, go and check their preprint policy, because generally they will be happy to have your paper. Some of them may say, I expect you to only preprint with this license or the other license. In general terms, you can license the preprint however you like and the journal article however you like, because there are different copies. Essentially, the journal may impose a policy and you will need to follow it, but legally, it's not a very strong footing. Essentially, you can choose if you are given the choice from the preprint server, because that's the other thing. Some servers will say, I post your preprint, it needs to be CC BY, so an open license allowing reuse with attribution. Some other servers like Archive and BioArchive, they give you a list of options. So you can choose CC BY if you want, or other ones like all rights reserved. Nobody, you can only read it and do nothing else. But I would say essentially this is your choice as an author, and so you can just tell them I posted this and the license is X. Because at the end of the day, you may change it and submit to a journal later, so it's a different entity that you're giving them. I think we have a license FAQ on ASAP Bio. I will try to post that on the chat. There is a bit of information on that.
Yeah, thank you. Would be nice.
So we have it here. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Okay, so I think I'll just pass the ball back to Michaela for the final comment.
Yeah,
Thank you again, Iratxe. It was really
Thank you
fun
for
listening
having
to you.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, really thank you, because I learned a lot of things that I didn't know. So it was really, really interesting. I didn't know that preprint could be reviewed actually. So thank you.
Wonderful.
Again.
No, thank you for having me.
Gabriele, if you can share your screen with the last slide. Okay. Thank you very much, Gabriele, and thank you again, Iratxe, for your presentation. Really interesting, and for all of you that attended today's seminar. All of you that requested the certificate of attendance, you will you will receive an email within the next 7 days. That will be your certificate of attendance. And next month's speaker will be Alex Colcomb, who is going to talk about contributorship, changing practices to better credit researchers. And last, we will inform the Italian Reproducibility Network members via email when we upload the video on our YouTube channel, where you can find also the registration of our previous seminars. Good afternoon again, and thank you very much.